My parents left me alone in a hospital bed so they wouldn't miss a week in Cancun. While I lay there with a fractured vertebra and a stranger's hand squeezing mine through the bed rail, my mother was posting a photo of a margarita on Facebook with a little sunny emoji underneath it. They had planned the trip for almost a year. They said the flights were non-refundable. They said I would be fine. What they didn't know was that my grandmother had heard every single excuse, and 8 months later, at her 70th birthday dinner, she opened a notebook on the table and read them all out loud. Before we get into it, leave me a comment telling me where you're watching from. I love seeing where people are tuning in from across Canada and beyond. And if you're new here, please subscribe. I put a lot of myself into these stories, and it means everything to have people here for them. My name is Adrian. I'm 31 years old, and I live in Barrie, Ontario. I want to start by saying that I'm not someone who asks for help easily. I was the kid who made her own lunches, figured out her own bus route to school, and worked every weekend through university so she wouldn't have to ask her parents for money. Not because they didn't have it, but because I had learned very early on that asking felt complicated. That asking meant owing something. My younger brother was different. He had always been the one things were arranged around. When he wanted hockey equipment, my father drove 4 hours to find the right size. When I needed braces, we waited to see. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't the kind of thing you can easily explain to someone from the outside. It was quieter than that, just a pattern. The kind you only recognize fully when something forces it into the light. The accident happened on a Tuesday in February. I was driving back from a friend's place on a stretch of Highway 400 that I had driven 100 times before. The road looked fine, then, it didn't. Black ice, a curve, a guardrail, and the next thing I clearly remember is a paramedic telling me to stay still and not move my neck. I spent 3 days in Royal Victoria Regional Health Centre before the imaging confirmed what the doctors suspected. A compression fracture in my lower spine. Not surgical, they said, but serious enough that I needed monitoring, pain management, and the beginning of physiotherapy while still inpatient. It would be at least another week before I could go home, and going home would not mean returning to normal. It would mean weeks of careful movement, appointments, and fear. I called my mother from my hospital bed that first evening with the IV still in my arm. She cried. My father said he was coming right away. My grandmother, my father's mother, who lives in Collingwood about 40 minutes north, was in her car before I even hung up the phone. What I didn't know then was that my parents' trip to Cancun was scheduled to leave in 9 days. My parents had booked an all-inclusive through WestJet Vacations almost a year earlier, a full week at a resort in Riviera Maya. My mother, my father, and my brother. They had talked about it constantly since September. My mother had bought new swimsuits. My brother had told everyone at work. It was their first real trip since before the pandemic, and they were genuinely excited about it. When my father finally brought it up, sitting beside my bed, 5 days after the accident, I thought he was going to tell me they were canceling. His voice had the careful, gentle tone of someone preparing to deliver something difficult. I even started to tell him not to worry about the money, that I understood. Instead, he told me they had called WestJet. The tickets were non-refundable. Travel insurance didn't cover the situation. The policy required an emergency involving the traveler themselves, not a family member. The resort had a strict no-refund window. They had already lost the deposit on a prepaid excursion. I looked at him for a long moment. Dad, I said, I'm in a hospital bed. You're stable, he said. The doctors said you're stable. My mother sat across the room and didn't say anything. My brother, who had come down from his apartment in Sudbury to visit once, had texted that morning to say he was really sorry, but that he had already booked time off work that lined up with the trip, and it would be hard to change. I asked them, plainly, to please consider postponing. I told them I was scared. I told them that physiotherapy was going to be hard, and that I didn't know how I was going to manage getting back to my apartment alone. I told them I had never felt this vulnerable in my adult life. My mother reached over and patted my hand. You're so strong, she said. You've always been the strong one. I had heard that my whole life. Every time it appeared, it meant the same thing. It meant, we're counting on that strength right now. It meant, handle this yourself. My grandmother was the only one in the room who looked like she wanted to say something. She didn't. She just sat there in the corner chair, the one with the cracked vinyl armrest, and watched. Her hands were folded in her lap. Her face was very still. My parents and my brother flew out 9 days later. My grandmother drove to Barrie the morning they left, and knocked on the door of my hospital room just after 7 a.m., with a thermos of tea and a container of oatmeal she had made herself. She sat down, poured me a cup, and asked me how I had slept. She was 70 years old. She had arthritis in both knees. She had driven 40 minutes in the dark on a February morning, so that I would not wake up alone. The days that followed are both sharp and blurry in my memory. Sharp because certain moments cut right through. The first time I sat up unassisted, the burning in my lower back during the initial physio sessions, the way my grandmother held the door open and counted my steps in a quiet voice that didn't embarrass me. Blurry because there was a sameness to the pain, the effort, the exhaustion. My grandmother was there through all of it. She organized her whole life around my schedule. She drove me to appointments after I was discharged, helped me navigate the paperwork for physiotherapy coverage through OHIP and my employer's benefits plan, carried groceries up the stairs to my apartment when I couldn't manage the weight myself. She slept on my couch for the first week I was home so I wouldn't be alone if something happened during the night. Meanwhile, my parents were in Cancun. The messages came in every day or so, not asking about my pain levels or my physio progress, not asking what I needed or whether there was anything they could do from where they were. Mostly updates about the resort, photos of the pool, a video of my brother doing a cannonball off the diving board. My mother wrote once to say the buffet was actually really good for a place this size. My father sent us a photo of a sunset over the ocean and said it was unreal. I would read these messages and then set my phone face down on the kitchen counter and stare at the wall for a while. One evening, I was on a video call with my grandmother while she was home in Collingwood. I had had a hard physio session that afternoon. One of those days where progress felt like it was going backwards. I was tired and sore and said something I had been trying not to say for days. I don't think they actually care that much. Not about me specifically. My grandmother was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "People's choices are usually pretty honest about where they stand." She didn't defend my parents. She didn't say I was wrong, or that I was being too harsh, or that I should try to understand their perspective. She just acknowledged what I had said. It was the most validating thing anyone had offered me in weeks. I noticed something after that call. When messages came in from my parents, I sometimes saw my grandmother typing a reply, and then not sending it, or I would catch her looking at her phone with an expression I couldn't quite read. I didn't ask. I assumed she was upset and processing it privately. I didn't realize she was building something. The day my parents told me they were extending the trip was the day something in me finally stopped making excuses for them. My mother sent a voice message, breezy, almost apologetic but not quite, explaining that there was a deal on an extended stay at the resort, 4 extra days for a fraction of the original price. It would be silly not to take it, she said. We'll be back before you know it. You're doing so well. I was sitting at my kitchen table when I listened to it, still in my housecoat, trying to figure out how to get my compression socks on, without bending forward too sharply. I listened to the message twice. I didn't cry. I had done enough crying. I just put the phone down and sat there for a long time, looking at nothing in particular. My grandmother called that evening. I could hear in her voice that she already knew. She didn't say much. But before we hung up, she said quietly, "I want you to know that I'm paying attention to all of this." I thought she meant emotionally. I thought she was telling me that she saw what was happening and that she cared. She meant it more literally than that. When my family returned from Cancun, 12 days total, in the end, they came through my door talking about the trip. My mother pulled out her phone to show me photos almost immediately. My brother had brought back a bottle of local hot sauce and treated it like a significant gift. My father sat on my couch and stretched out his legs and said the flights home had been long but worth it. Nobody asked how the physio was going. Nobody asked about the appointment I'd had 3 days earlier, where the physiotherapist had suggested I might need additional imaging. Nobody asked if I was sleeping or scared or managing. What came next happened slowly, and then all at once. I stopped hoping my mother would ask the right question. I stopped angling conversations toward what I actually needed. I put my energy somewhere else, into recovery, into work, into the friendships that had actually showed up. A colleague had driven me to 2 appointments without being asked. My best friend had spent a Saturday helping me reorganize my apartment so I could move around it more safely. These people had nothing to gain. They just showed up. My grandmother, meanwhile, had become unusually organized. She kept a notebook. I saw it once on her kitchen table when I visited, a regular lined notebook with a hard blue cover, and she closed it quickly when she noticed me looking. She said she was writing down some things she wanted to remember. I didn't press her. What she had been doing, I would later learn, was documenting everything. Every message my parents sent during the trip, every day they didn't call, the voice message about extending the vacation, the text my brother sent while I was still in the hospital, where he described the resort and followed it up with a photo of himself at a restaurant. The conversations after they came home, captured through her own careful memory, written down with dates. She had also gone back further. Hockey equipment and braces. Family trips I had stayed home from because money was suddenly tight. A university graduation my parents had left early because my brother had a game that evening. She had details. She had a record going back years. I had no idea how far it reached. I just knew somehow that something was coming. My grandmother turned 70 in October. My parents organized a dinner at a restaurant in Collingwood, the kind of place with white tablecloths and a prix-fixe menu, the kind of event my mother liked because it gave her something to arrange. Extended family came, my father's 2 sisters and their husbands, my grandmother's oldest friends, a few people from her church, about 20 people in a private room at the back of the restaurant. My grandmother had asked me specifically to be there. She had called me the week before, and her voice had that same particular quality I had noticed at the hospital. Calm, but with something moving underneath it. She said she wanted me present. I said of course. I didn't know what was about to happen. The dinner went normally for the first hour. Wine was poured, appetizers came. My father made a toast early on, warm, vague, the kind of speech he gave at family events where he hit all the expected notes without saying anything specific. My grandmother smiled and thanked everyone for coming. Then, when the main course had been cleared, she stood up. She was not a dramatic person. She had never been someone who made scenes or raised her voice or sought the center of a room. So when she stood and asked if she could say a few words before dessert, people expected something gentle. A memory or two, gratitude, maybe something sentimental about getting older. She reached into her bag and placed the blue notebook on the table. The room got quieter before she even opened it. She started by thanking everyone genuinely. She meant it, and it showed. Then she said that she wanted to share something before the evening ended, because she had learned late in life that silence, while comfortable, was not always kind. She told the story of my accident. She described the morning she drove to Barrie in the dark. She described the hospital room, and the cracked vinyl chair, and the fact that I had been alone when she arrived. She described the 9 days between the accident and the departure for Cancun. And then she opened the notebook and began to read. She read the voice message my mother had sent about extending the trip. She read it slowly, word for word, in her careful, steady voice, while my mother sat at the far end of the table and went very still. She read my brother's message, the one about the resort pool, sent the same afternoon I had my first physiotherapy session. She read a text my father had sent where he described the ocean view as paradise. With each one, the room got quieter. My father tried to interrupt once. He said it wasn't the right time or place for this. My grandmother looked at him and said, very calmly, that she had waited long enough for the right time and place and had decided to stop waiting. Then she went back further. She told her daughters-in-law, my aunts, about the years before, the hockey equipment, the graduation, the trips. She had dates. She had the quiet authority of someone who had watched carefully for a very long time and chosen her moment. What I remember most is not my parents' reaction. I had expected defensiveness and I got it. What I remember most is my father's older sister, my aunt, looking across the table at me and saying quietly, I always wondered about some of this. I never said anything I should have. Other people nodded. One of my grandmother's friends reached over and took my hand. Nobody rushed to defend what had happened. Nobody redirected the moment. The carefully maintained image my parents had built of themselves, devoted, consistent, fair, cracked in that room in a way that could not be quietly repaired. The months after that dinner changed things in ways that were real and lasting. My parents called relatives and offered their version of events. My father sent me a message saying my grandmother had embarrassed the family. But the thing about evidence is that it doesn't renegotiate. People had heard the actual words, read from an actual notebook. There was nothing to contextualize around. My brother became quieter around me. I stopped trying to determine whether it was guilt or discomfort. What I noticed was that other people were no longer arranging themselves around him the way they once had. And me, something I had been carrying for a very long time got lighter. I had spent years trying to earn the same easy, unconditional regard that had always been offered to my brother, without question. I had managed my own needs so I would seem capable and low maintenance and worthy of love. It had never worked. Not because I wasn't trying hard enough, because that particular version of love had simply never been available to me. My grandmother had seen that. She had seen it for years, and she had waited, and she had documented. And when the moment was right, she had stood up in a white tablecloth restaurant in Collingwood and refused to let it stay buried. I visit her every few weeks now. She makes tea, the same kind she brought in that thermos to my hospital room, and we sit at her kitchen table and talk about ordinary things, the weather, her garden, something funny that happened at her book club. She asks about my physio progress and my work, and whether I'm sleeping enough. One afternoon, not long ago, I asked her why she had waited, why the birthday dinner, and not sooner. She looked out the window for a moment, at the bare branches of the maple tree in her front yard. I wanted witnesses, she said, and I wanted to be sure, when you present the truth, you only get one chance to do it cleanly. I thought about that for a long time on the drive home. I've stopped measuring my worth against how my parents see me. It took a fractured spine, a hard Ontario winter, and a woman in her 70s sleeping on my couch, to teach me that the people who choose to be there, when it costs them something, when there is no convenience in it, when no one is watching, those are the people who love you. Not the ones who say the right things at family dinners. Not the ones who tell you you're strong when what they really mean is that your strength makes things easier for them. The ones who drive in the dark. The ones who count your steps in a quiet voice. The ones who keep a blue notebook and wait for exactly the right moment. I have one of those people, and it turned out to be more than enough.